So here's the thing that I find that I got a little bit annoyed about. I tried to stay off Twitter to some degree over the vacation. I was not horribly successful. For the most part, I'm trying to stay out of like, I'm not going to get into, too many primary wars. I am not a fan of Joe Biden's. And I've made no secret of that on Twitter. But what I also really, really I'm finding getting under my skin is, and I don't mind, I think there are legitimate critiques of Sanders. I think there's legitimate critiques of all the candidates. And, on balance, or I think Sanders is the strongest candidate and can bring about the greatest amount of change as president. But for the most part, I don't get caught up on stuff. Start with Norm Ornstein's thing. This is what was really, go backwards. You got to keep going back because here it is. This really drives me nuts because the thing I'm worried about more than anything is Donald Trump winning re-election. That is the thing that I am worried. That is the worst case scenario. Joe Biden as president is not the worst case scenario to me. Pete Buttigieg, as much as I dislike the guy, not the worst case scenario. Amy Klobuchar, not the worst case scenario. I think long run, it's particularly those three. If they win, it's highly problematic. We're going to be dealing with, Tom Cotton in a different way, whatever. But the worst case scenario is Donald Trump being president January 21st, 2021. That's the worst case scenario. And just from a pure statistical assessment, Bernie Sanders has probably a 33 to 51% chance of being the nominee for the Democratic Party. He's one of three people who I think legitimately have a real chance. The idea that anybody can both hold the idea that Donald Trump is the greatest threat to the Republic, and I'm going to do something to undercut Bernie Sanders or, frankly, Biden or Warren or Buttigieg in the general election, to me, is a real problem. I have differences with Biden's policies. I'm also worried about his electability. Same with Buttigieg. Warren, I am more comfortable with than both those by a mile. But spreading lies to the effect of like, it's okay to undercut one of these people if they're the final nominee is a real problem. And this is what Norm Ornstein did. Now, Norm Ornstein, where does he work? At the AIE? I mean, he is ostensibly he's at the AIE. And, he's a centrist. I mean, I think he votes Democrat and he's a centrist. He used to be on Al Franken's show and Al would be to the left of him. And at that time, Al wasn't even that, it was left, but he wasn't left. But here's what I just found bizarre. What's the date of this tweet? December 26th, 2019. He tweets out. Okay. So he tweets out So it was not 10% of Bernie supporters who did not vote for Hillary. It was over 25%. And he tweets out a graphic from a story in 538 that says what Bernie Sanders primary voters did in November 2016. 75% voted for Hillary Clinton. 12% voted for Donald Trump. 3% voted for Gary Johnson. 4.5% voted for Jill Stein. 2.5% for other candidates or didn't recall. 1.6 voted, said they would have voted for Clinton, but they didn't vote. 1.9 didn't vote and said they would have voted for, or didn't say they would have voted for Clinton. All right. So he writes, it was over 25% of Bernie supporters who did not vote for Hillary. Now that's true. But in the same article, which was from February of 2019, this is almost a year-old article that he is putting out now, as if he discovered something. Because everybody knows that 12% of Bernie Sanders' primary voters voted for Donald Trump, as opposed to 24% of Clinton voters in 2008 voted for John McCain. 25%. Voted for John McCain. Not voted, not stayed home, not voted third party, voted for John McCain. But in that same article, he's clipping from, was this. You might be tempted to think that these, quote, never Hillary voters are leftists who thought Clinton was too much of a pro-corporate war-mongering centrist. But relatively few of them were. Less than a fifth of them voted for Stein, for example. Instead, these voters were disproportionately likely to describe themselves as moderate or conservative. Among the 31% of self-described conservatives who voted for Sanders in the Democratic primaries, more than half were never Hillary voters, for example. A large minority of independents and Republicans who supported Sanders were never Hillary voters as well. So if anything, what this story should have really, if you're an honest broker, should tell you is that either Hillary Clinton was so hated that it inspired people to jump into the Democratic primary, which I'm sure is partially true. But the other partial truth is that Bernie Sanders has an ability to attract non-Democratic votes. Now, I don't think this is what Bernie Sanders' greatest strength is in terms of a general election. I happen to think he's attracting marginal voters who agree with leftist positions, broadly speaking, and get activated to vote. But the only interpretation of this number that you can make in this article is that this is a positive for Bernie Sanders. But Norm Ornstein is weaponizing this to basically say that not just that Bernie Sanders, you should vote for a different candidate, or that Bernie Sanders' policies are wrong or whatnot, but that there's something fundamentally against the primary directive that we all have, which is get rid of Donald Trump, that Bernie represents. That can easily be translated into the general election. In other words, stirring up those flames from 2016. Now there are people on the left who do this too. You know, Jimmy Dore is attacking Peter Dow for whatever reason. Like at this point, like can't take any value where it's coming from. You know, I interviewed Peter Dow. I thought it was an interesting interview. I don't know. I think he's sincere, but I don't care. I don't care if he has a facade for the remainder of the year, if it supports Bernie. Why wouldn't I take that? It's because for people like Jimmy Dore, politics is really about validation for themselves. It has nothing to do with policy objectives or end goals. And for politics for Norm Ornstein, being a centrist, being someone who is supposedly sort of just like I just call it as I see it, It's really about protecting a set of issues that are maybe not as egalitarian, maybe a set of issues that maintain power where it is for the most part, because he's done quite well within that structure. But so my response was, and I quite enjoyed this because I don't generally go engage with people like this in terms of Twitter fights. But I wrote, this is sad. I don't like watching someone destroy their reputation as a balls and strikes guy. Now, I'll be honest. I don't know that that's his reputation, but I feel like that's the way he perceives his reputation, right? By blatantly misinterpreting numbers for false narratives, and to do so at the expense of democratic unity. And I put an exclamation point there because you know how important that is to me. Norm, everyone can read that 538 article and see what you're doing. Sad. And then Norm responded to that.
Did he maybe quote tweet? I don't know if it's, let me see. I have one here.
He brought it up somewhere.
I'm not able to find this.
Let me see if I can find it here somewhere in my mentions. But, I mean, basically, we went back and forth a little bit, and here it is. Bear with us, folks. Everybody's a little rusty after returning from vacation. And he goes, if you want to pretend that Nina Turner, Susan Sarandon, and David Sirota, among others, did not exist in 2016, go ahead. Now, remember, he's posting a poll. And now it's turning into, I don't like Nina Turner, Susan Sarandon, and David Sirota. If you want to ignore the Russian efforts to turn Sanders a voter from is at your right. Away from is your right. If you wanted to deny that there was a difference in swing states, all of which is not what I was arguing at all. I was arguing that what you're saying about Bernie Sanders voters is a clear misrepresentation. Period. End of story. And then I wrote back, if your argument is that Trump won those Midwest states because of tweets or proclamations from that actor, that state representative, and that journalist, then please show your work. Otherwise, I suggest that you stop confusing and or projecting your anger with analysis. Now, look, I've said many times, I don't know if those particular people certainly said that Susan Sarandon's perspective on this was dumb. And I certainly don't think it helped. But, and I think it contributed to Clinton's loss? Probably. Was it determinative? I said a million times that there's a dozen reasons why Clinton lost. Why it was that close, why she lost, Comey, just all the baggage she had, period. The way that she ran her campaign, her strategy of picking up 2 or 3 Republicans in the suburbs versus that one blue collar guy in Pittsburgh. All of it. But it certainly wasn't something that was unique about Bernie Sanders voters that caused her to lose. And then I just tweeted at him below there. There was one more. He goes, make that journalist. In a quote, a concerted effort to drive votes from Clinton made no difference in states where she lost by a tiny margin. Sure, go ahead and believe that if it makes you feel better. But the concerted effort, if you want to say that you think that those 3 people or whomever helped suppress the vote against Clinton in those states, then make that argument. Show your work and make the argument. But don't twist a graphic that comes from a piece that says these were not people who were going to vote for Hillary Clinton under any circumstance and try and twist it into that. I think it's creepy, and it's decidedly unhelpful. You can't make these tweets with the premise that this is what brought us Donald Trump, and therefore what I'm going to do is increase the chances that we're going to get Donald Trump again. And consider yourself a responsible actor if that's really your goal. You can't do it. You can't. Because guess what? You're doing the same thing that you're accusing these people of doing. You're doing the exact same thing. So if it's that reprehensible that they did it, maybe you should stop it. That's all. That's my point there. And lastly, folks, all right.